What if I told you that just a few years after World War I, Germany and Soviet Russia, two nations that had fought each other bitterly and seemed like ideological opposites, became allies? It sounds impossible. One was a brand new communist state, despised and feared across Europe. The other was the defeated Weimar Republic, humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. And yet, in 1922, in a quiet seaside town in Italy, they signed an agreement that stunned the world. This was the Treaty of Rapallo. On the surface, it looked like a modest diplomatic deal. In reality, it was the beginning of a secret partnership that allowed Germany to quietly rebuild its military power and gave Soviet Russia the technology and expertise it desperately needed. To understand Rapallo, we need to go back to the end of World War I. Germany had been crushed by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The Allies stripped it of colonies and territory, imposed crippling levels of financial compensations, and limited its army to 100,000 men. The German Navy was reduced to a handful of ships, and the country was forbidden to build submarines, aircraft, or tanks. Versailles left Germany both humiliated and isolated, seen by many as the guilty party of the war. Russia's fate was no better. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, Lenin's new government pulled the country out of the war by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, handing over vast territories. But when Germany lost in 1918, that treaty was voided. By then, Russia was consumed by civil war between Reds and Whites, foreign intervention, and famine. To the west, the Bolsheviks were dangerous revolutionaries who threatened to spread communism across Europe. No major power recognized them. By the early 1920s, Germany and Soviet Russia shared something in common. Both were pariahs, cut out of the new international order created at Versailles. As historian Sally Marks later put it, Rapallo was the meeting of two outcasts drawn together by mutual isolation. In the spring of 1922, the great powers of Europe gathered at Genoa, Italy, for a massive economic conference. 34 countries sent delegates. The main aim was to stabilize Europe after the chaos of the First World War, and a central question was what to do about Soviet Russia. Britain, under Prime Minister Lloyd George, was willing to talk with Moscow. He wanted to bring the Bolsheviks back into the global economy, but the Western powers insisted that Russia first acknowledge its old debts and compensate foreign investors whose property had been seized after the revolution. For Moscow, just emerging from civil war and famine, these demands felt impossible. Foreign Minister Georgy Chicherin complained bitterly that the Soviets were being treated as pariahs and beggars. Germany, too, had come to Genoa, represented by Foreign Minister Walter Rathenau. But the Germans were equally frustrated. Versailles had reduced them to second-class status, reparations strangled their economy, and at Genoa they were largely sidelined, treated more as a problem to be managed than as a partner. And so, in the middle of all the posturing and speeches, the German and Soviet delegations began talking quietly. Both felt humiliated, both were isolated, and both wanted to break out of their diplomatic cages. As the Allied negotiations dragged on, they decided to simply step aside and make their own deal. They chose the nearby seaside town of Rapallo. On April 16, 1922, without warning the other powers, Rathenau and Chicherin signed the Treaty of Rapallo. Publicly, the text was simple. Germany and Soviet Russia renounced all financial claims against one another, re-established diplomatic relations, and promised to expand trade. But the timing and the manner of it sent shockwaves through Europe. While the great powers had been debating how to cautiously reintegrate Russia into the world economy on Allied terms, Germany and the Soviets had already walked out, shaken hands, and announced their own partnership. Historian Jonathan Wright later summed it up: Rapallo was born in the shadows of Genoa. Two outcasts excluded from the feast set their own table. The real significance of Rapallo came in the secret arrangements that followed. Versailles had banned Germany from developing tanks, aircraft, chemical weapons, and submarines. But Soviet Russia had no interest in enforcing Versailles. Quite the opposite. It saw an opportunity. Soon after Rapallo, German and Soviet officers began cooperating in secret facilities deep inside Russia. Near Kazan, German tank crews tested prototypes that would have been forbidden on German soil. At Lipetsk, a Soviet airfield, German pilots trained and experimented with new aircraft. At Samara, a joint chemical weapons facility was established. In all of these places, German officers could work without Allied inspectors watching, while Soviet engineers learned from Germany's advanced technology. Historian Richard J. Evans explained it clearly. The Rapallo relationship allowed Germany to evade Versailles, and the Soviet Union to leap ahead technologically. This cooperation was highly pragmatic. The Soviets needed expertise to modernize their army after years of civil war. The Germans needed places to test and train in secret. Ideology, communism versus democracy, mattered less than survival. The Treaty of Rapallo had consequences far beyond 1922. For Germany, it was a lifeline. The Reichswehr, limited and humiliated at home, could secretly develop the weapons and tactics that would one day re-emerge under Hitler. For Russia, it meant access to German industrial know-how, engineers, and technology, accelerating its modernization. Diplomatically, Rapallo was a warning. It showed that when excluded from the Western system, Germany and Russia could always find each other, a pattern that would repeat in 1939 with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, when Hitler and Stalin divided Eastern Europe. For France especially, Rapallo was a nightmare. Paris feared that a German-Russian partnership might eventually turn into a military alliance that could threaten Europe's balance of power. As historian Jonathan Wright later wrote, Rapallo was less a treaty than a state of mind, the knowledge that Germany and Russia, when excluded by others, could always turn to each other. The cooperation established at Rapallo lasted through the 1920s, but it was fragile. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, everything changed. Hitler despised communism and broke off the partnership, expelling Soviet officers and shutting down the secret bases. Instead, he prepared for rearmament openly in defiance of Versailles. Yet the memory of Rapallo lingered. In 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union would once again shock the world by signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a brutal echo of the Rapallo spirit. The Treaty of Rapallo was born from isolation. Germany, crippled by Versailles, and Soviet Russia, rejected as a revolutionary pariah, found common cause. In a small Italian town, they built a partnership that allowed one to cheat restrictions and the other to modernize. It was not just a treaty, but a warning. When the outcasts of the international system are pushed too far, they often turn to each other, and in the case of Rapallo, their cooperation planted seeds that would shape Europe for decades.